On to our next session. A poet who dreamt of freedom for his country long before it became a reality. A man who dreamt of a bold and fearless woman who would walk the lanes of his land at midnight unarmed, who went past the social shackles of his day, bold, dreamer, futurist, activist, feminist. Many are the labels thrown at him. Thanks to his wife Chelama's efforts to publish his works post his passing, we have much of Mahakavi Subramanya Bharathi's work to enjoy. A lover of Bharathi's work is always part of a cult. So what is the legacy of Bharathi that refuses to die and only grows stronger with each passing year? In conversation with Niranjan Bharathi, the great-grandson of Subramanya Bharathi, who's an emerging poet of fame for his own work, is Shobhana Kumar.
Such an honor to be in conversation with you, Niranjan.
Thank you.
Sir.
Thank
you so much for it. So I'm just going to get to the questions and the conversation right away.
Sure.
So, Navina Tamil Sirpi, that's how Bharatiyar is popularly known. And when you say Bharathi, it is the name that makes millions of Tamilians, it's what keeps them awake at night.
It makes them overwhelmed.
Overwhelmed, inspired. So for you, as an inheritor of this legacy, if we were to coin the term that you coined yourself, Bharatiism, what does that mean to you?
For me, Bharatiism is the confluence of ancient wisdom and modern thinking. And for me, Bharatiism is like a search engine where you can find unity, brotherhood, patriotism, nationalism, ethnicism, feminism, modern Tamil, Tamil poetry, universal love, universal consciousness, devotion, spirituality, and the list goes on. To put it in a nutshell, like Bharati or Bharatiyar, he was like the F5 button, the refresh button for India 100 years ago. And even till now, he is like that refresh button for each and every one of us. And I am alone not the sole inheritor of Bharatiism. I may be from his bloodline, that is different, that is there. But each and every Tamilian, each and every Indian, in fact, who really adores and always looks upon Bharati as his extension. So they are all our inheritors, and this is what I believe Bharatiism is. And last but not the least, this Bharatiism is not dead. It's not like an antique piece which you can find in museums. It is still alive, and it is brimming with life always.
It is timeless in every sense of the word.
Exactly.
And I just want to pick this concept of universal love that you spoke about. And I'm reminded of Einstein's letter to his daughter Liza. And I want to quote this. He says, when scientists looked for a unified theory of the universe, they forgot the most powerful unseen force. Love is light that enlightens those who give and receive it. And if we were to look at Bharati's vast scope of work, this universal thread of love is what actually binds it. And we not only hear it and read it from his work, but we also listen to it from anecdotes about his life, about his love for his family, how high he held in esteem his wife, his love for his daughters, his love for a mule on the road, right? And for all living beings. So on that note, on this universal love that, that made him a very, very higher version of the human being that we all aspire to be. So what were the circumstances that made it possible? So because he lived also in a time that was really fraught with so many uncertainties in India.
In one way, you kind of told the answer. The times in which he lived and the sad plight of the nation, and the universal love, consciousness, brotherhood, whatever it may be, whatever you are talking about, stemmed from the fact that the nation was indeed, like the Bharat Mata was a slave to the British. And he completely disliked the concept that a human being can make another human being his slave. And this concept of master, slave, and really irritated him. And this instilled a lot of fear among the Indians and a sense of inferiority complex among the Indians, and which he hated. And that's why even in most of his poems, you can find lines like, we should kill fear in those contexts, in those lines. Achamillai, 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 achamenbadillai, he says. Acham tavir, he says. Acham means fear in Tamil. Bayamennum peydanai adithom, he says in another song. So he looks fear as a demon to be killed. So it all stemmed from the fact that we were like slaves to the British. And he didn't like the concept of slavery. So when you go down to the roots, that absence of love, that absence of self-respect, that absence of pride towards one's own heritage and culture, this ultimately led to slavery and another foreign nation winning over us and conquering us. So he wanted to set everything right. He wanted to start from square one and make everything right, like from the scratch. So he wanted to abolish that slavery, whether it is the country, whether it is in the household, whether it is on the streets, whether it is with other living beings. And that's why you can find in most of his songs the concept of universal love or brotherhood, impartiality, equality. They will all be very prevalent. And of course, as the years progressed, and when he stepped on to Puducherry, when he lived in Puducherry for 10 years, and his spiritual side, the spiritual face of Bharati bloomed there. And there he was always in conversations with Sri Aurobindo, always discussing about Vedas and Upanishads. And Bharatiyar was a very, very staunch and a serious Advaiti. And that's a very famous Bharati scholar. He is no more now. His name is Dr. T.N. Ramachandran, who lived in Tanjore. And you can find a lot of similarities in Bharati songs. For example, he talks about the Russian Revolution. And in Russian Revolution, it is really stunning to see his thought, because it is not just that he kind of registers what happened in Russia. And of course, the Emperor Tsar was dethroned, etc., etc. It was not just a report. He says, Annai Parashakti, Russia meedu kadaikkan vaithal. It means that Parashakti, the goddess Parashakti, just glanced upon Russia. It is completely like out of the box. How will someone think like that? Like Parashakti is, of course, a god which belongs to our country. Of course, it is out of this religion, Hinduism. But he says, for him, Parashakti is the world god, world goddess. He says Parashakti glanced her sight, her vision upon Russia, and a new Russia was born. So in a patriotic song, he adds an element of spirituality in it. And for example, in another song, a very famous song, where he talks to children, it is called as Papa Paatu. In fact, he had two daughters. The elder daughter was named as Tangamma. The younger one was named as Shakuntala. She was born when he was reading Shakuntalam, written by Kalidas. So he named his second daughter as Shakuntala. And she was fondly called as Papa by Bharati. And addressing her, it was like a world song for all the children. And there he talks about social responsibility for children. It is just a song for the children. It was like an edutainment song. Hundreds of years ago, it was a revelation. He talks about environmentalism. He talks about charity. He talks about love, consciousness to a small child. And that's how he blends everything.
Absolutely. Odi vilayadu paapave vandu is educational than in so many
Yes,
ways.
yes.
It is it's that. So when one reads the biographical sketches of Bharati written by his granddaughter Vijaya Bharati and others, so many others who have documented his life, one of the things that comes to light is that 1912 was a particularly prolific year in his writing. Appadan the Kannan Paattu, Kuil Paattu, all that came into being, and his years especially in Pondicherry. So we all know that Sri Aurobindo was a huge influence in Bharati's life. But and then he was also the editor of India. He was working with Swadeshi Mitran, and so many things were happening. But are there any? I mean, this is also from the view of many poets who are here in the audience. Like, what do you think, listening to his stories, could have been the reason for this prolific output during these years?
Of course, when you look at Bharati's poems, a simple answer to this is like he dedicated his life for this country. Right. As simple as that, okay? That is a one-word answer. But if you delve deep into it, actually, to be precise, from the year 1910 to 1913, not alone 1912, it was from the year 1910 to 13 that he became prolific. Right. And the turning point happened, in fact, in 1908, actually, where when he met Sister Nivedita near Kolkata. And that one incident completely revolutionized him and transformed him. And Sister Nivedita Devi, she breathed a new life into him. She transformed him. Absolutely. And after returning to Chennai from Kolkata, he wrote numerous songs. Yes. On Desha Bhakti. Like in 1908, his first collection of patriotic songs got published. Right. And again, part 2 came in 1909. And in 1910, his mystical novel titled Jnana Rath was published. And it is prose, not poetry. And it was a new attempt in those times. And his own he wrote his autobiography as well. Not only Chinna Sankaran Kadai, Kanavu. That is his autobiography that got published in 1910. And then we had Chinna Sankaran Kadai. And then we had a short story by him called as Ariluru Pangu. And then we had Panjali Sabdam getting published, all within 1910 to 1913. And Panjali Sabdam is one of his most famous works. And what made him prolific is, of course, he's a natural poet. Writing poetry is like breathing for him. And of course, we can never imagine those days, actually. We are now living in an independent era, but 100 years ago, it was not the case. And he was not coming from a very affluent family. Yes. He was always surrounded by poverty. And even in those trying times, just imagine you can't just, you can roam freely, you can go out wherever you want to go, but always the police will be following you. In 1910-11, I think, a freedom fighter from Tamil Nadu called Vanjinathan shot a collector in a railway station, and he killed himself after that. And it is believed that Vanjinathan had a poetry written by Bharati in his pocket at that time. So Bharatiyar was under surveillance all the time. So it is not at all easy. We talk a lot about stress management today, but hundreds of years ago, there were no counselors or nobody like that. But yet, he managed to bring out his best. Sometimes, extreme pressure brings out in you your best talent. I think that's what happened to Bharati. And of course, it is all a divine plan, I feel. Puducherry was the place where he wrote his best poems. He reached the peak.
So would you say that, I mean, in a lot of ways, this deep spiritual anchoring that he had with Sister Nivedita and Sri Aurobindo, and he himself being a prolific reader of the Vedas and Gita Padichirkari. He's also read extensively on the Quran. He's quoted from the Quran. He's read the Bible and he's quoted extensively from the Bible. So do you think spiritual anchoring had a lot to do with the way he
Definitely,
managed his...
undoubtedly,
all right.
100%. And
Right.
he was a very ardent devotee of Parashakti, and we call that sect called Shaktam. And in many of his songs, you can find that he will argue with her as if she is his real mother, and that backing. And in order to overcome all these struggles, in order to face them, in order to fight against them, one has to have enormous amount of willpower. And he was enormously strong on the inside. When you look at him, his appearance wasn't like very charming, or he wasn't well built, he wasn't strong. But on the inside, he always had the never say die attitude. And that we owe it to his bhakti, undoubtedly.
And I suppose there's something so magnetic about Bharati's eyes, even through a photograph. It's very hard not to be inspired by just looking at that.
Yes.
So, I mean, when we're speaking on the subject of Shaktam and the bhakti towards the Universal Mother, Bharati's idea of Pudumai Pen, so much that he's spoken about women's empowerment, and 100 years after his death, we're still battling for so many of those rights. So tell us about his concept of this Pudumai Pen, and I mean, how that journey actually began.
Yes, thank you for asking this question. And in fact, recently in an online Tamil weekly, I wrote a very small series called as Eppadi Pirandal Pudumai Pen, and in that series I have narrated the journey, and there are a lot of people who are behind this, and the foremost was Sister Nivedita, and she made him believe that pen vidudalai illamal man vidudalai illai. So only when the women of this nation get empowered, the nation will get empowered. So that was his motto, and that incident really spurred him on. And of course, he conducted a lot of experiments, and he coined that term Pudumai Pen. And till now, for many women, for the 2K kids or the 90s kids, for many girl children, he is still a superhero. And he conducted many experiments along with his wife, and his wife had to participate. In those days, 100 years ago, women were not allowed to go out in public. And he broke that taboo. And he took his wife for a casual evening walk. And all the neighbors in the fraternity accused him like anything. And Chellamma was like bowing her head down and walking along with him. She couldn't argue with him. She couldn't deny him. If Chellamma hadn't obliged then, if Chellamma hadn't bowed her head down and walked along with him hundreds of years ago, no woman now in this country can lift their heads up and walk. So such was their sacrifice in those days. And what I said now is just one instant. There are innumerable number of incidents like this.
Absolutely. And I think she was just such a fierce champion of his work.
Yes, yes.
Which brings me to my next question. In the biographical sketches, it is said that he composed the music for many of the songs that he wrote. He actually set it to tune. And it was Chellamma who actually brought these to light long after his passing. She could actually recall the tunes that he had set for different songs. And you are a lyricist born to a musician father. So I want to ask you two questions with respect to this. One is, tell us a little bit about this hymn setting it to music. So, I mean, what would do you think he composed the songs himself before they became poetry? And you as a lyricist, how is your train of thought? Do you also imagine, because I was listening to you in the earlier session, your poetry is music. There is so much oral quality to it. one is able to follow the rhythm so distinctly. So how is it that you think? So these two parts to this question.
Yeah,
sir.
sure. Bharati wrote many poems very strictly adhering to the grammar. But his thoughts were modern. But the structure or the skeleton or the template in which he wrote was ancient. That is the first point I would like to make. And with regards to music, he was a music lover himself. And he can sing. And of course, he had some knowledge about Carnatic music. And of course, he knew names of some ragas or some talas, etc. And since most of his poems or songs or lyrics, they can be set to tune very easily. And since he had some faint knowledge, because he was a great fan of Saint Tyagaraja, he loved his kirtans, and since he was very fond of Tyagaraja, he knew Telugu as well. He learned Telugu. And he read a lot of books on music. And while writing songs, and after writing them, he would give some raga name to it according to his limited knowledge and a specific tala to it. And immediately, after writing a song, he would sing. And whomsoever listens to Bharatiyar singing will melt and cry immediately. And mostly, the first and foremost audience for his songs or his poetry or his lyrics were, of course, his wife Chellamma and his children. And that's how we get to hear many of his songs, because he had that innate quality. And more so ever, he wanted to write songs for the nation. So that's when it can be spread easily and it can be learnt by many. So that's how he wanted to spread that spirit of patriotism among the public. So that is the answer for the first question. And of course, I'm a music lover as well. I am not such a well-versed singer as my father. I learned Carnatic music a bit, and I stopped in between. And of course, I can play on the mridangam, that is separate. With regards to poetry, now I have fallen in love with the ancient poetry of Tamil, which has a very rigid but a beautiful grammar. Reading a very ancient Tamil poetry is like watching a river flowing in a very controlled manner within its two banks.
Right.
So I follow that path.
Right. Thanks. So just one question, and then we'll open it up for audience. As a parting note, one of the things that Bharati reminds us as writers and as artists is to ceaselessly question, ceaselessly, have this internal dialogue with yourself, and to, of course, inspire and thereby revolutionize people to think. And as writers, we all know that writing is the start point of action. So for you, as an artist, what do you draw from his life? And would you close with a song that inspires you from Bharati?
Yeah, sure. Of course, I have imbibed a lot from him. To put it in a very simple style, love for one's own mother tongue, and love for the nation, and of course, that indomitable spirit and the everlasting willpower, and of course, that the feeling of surrendering to the supreme power, to the cosmic consciousness. And these are the qualities I have imbibed from him. And I'm reading him, and I'm reading him. So it is a lifelong journey. And of course, in my journey, I will surely learn a lot. To finish with a Bharatiyar song.
Before that, I'd just like to tell the audience that Mr. Niranjan Bharathi is carrying the legacy forward by starting something called My Tamil Guru, which is an online forum by which you learn Tamil in complex stages. So do look it up and please.
You can learn Tamil online through that course. Okay. Sorry. பாருக்குள்ளே நல்ல நாடு, பாருக்குள்ளே நல்ல நாடு, எங்கள் உயர் மானத்திலே அன்னதானத்திலே கானத்திலே அமுதாக நிறைந்த கவிதையிலே உயர் நாடு பாருக்குள்ளே நல்ல நாடு எங்கள் பாரத நாடு. தேங்க்யூ.
I think we've had enough reminders of what the India we want to be. We've had many reminders from this morning, so thank you for that, sir. Any questions? No time for question. One? Srividya, one? One question. Yes. My Tamil Guru.
You are always welcome to join our course, My Tamil Guru, so that you can brush up your Tamil skills. And of course, it comes by practice only, ma'am. And of course, you must have the guidance of a proper Tamil Guru or a teacher who can really explain to you the meanings. Of course, in those days, it was simple Tamil. Now it has become tough Tamil. It comes by continuous practice and reading. Surely you will understand one day. It is not so difficult.
Thank you very much.